All right. Well, welcome again. I'm David. I'm excited to be here. I'm glad you all are here because this is a hot topic and one that we want. I think a lot of people want to hear about. And so I shared just a little bit before that recording got going. I'll make sure I throw it in again. One of the things that colors the lens at which I see things and see as a parenting expert, how I address this question is a proverb that is an old proverb that states, if you raise a child in the way they should go, as they get older, they will not depart from it. And I think it's key because in that proverb, what we're hearing is that there's a stage of parenting and then there's a stage of adulthood. And as that child advances to that adult stage, they're going to go off the teaching, the teaching as the parent stops. And this seems to be a crux in a lot of the conversations that I have with parents because they still want to know, David, how do I get my child to behave the way that I want them to behave? And so as I share with you my lens, I want you to know all of the things that are going to kind of color the way in which I see my role and see the role of parenting. And so it's not just a single proverb, but it is a lot of my proper education, my formal education. I've got a doctorate in family science and learning and understanding family process and how processes work. I've spent a lot of time talking about family systems and that the individual is not just made up of all of the things within themselves, but of all the things that have gone around them since their start. All the systems that they're placed in have an effect on that individual and then the way that they perform. My role here is a senior specialist for parenting and child development. I have some military background, and I'll share a little bit about that as we go into it. I've been an instructor and an educator for 19 years. And in October, I will be a husband. I'll be married for 19 years. And that to me is pretty amazing. If that tells you anything as listeners, you should know that I have a degree in humility in making relationships work. In 2 months, even scarier, I will have a 12-year-old. And I have a younger son as well, a 9-year-old. I've been a family therapist, an individual therapist. I served for 5 years in that role and a researcher for 10 years. And the reason that I'm sharing this is because all of these pieces are going to help inform what I share with you today. It's not just being a parent, because you'll say, well, David, your child's not even a teenager yet. So get ready. I understand that. But I also was a family therapist and had an opportunity to work in the homes with older adults and with families, as well as my research and just being able to understand protective factors and what helps form and strengthen healthy families, or what can we do to mitigate the crises that oftentimes affect the full functioning of our families. And so now, having said that, I want to get into this idea of young adults and what it means to parent a young adult. But perhaps the first thing we should do is define what's an adult. What does that mean? At what age did you feel like an adult? And if you want to throw that in the chat, feel free. But more importantly, I just kind of want you to ponder that thought as we go through that. And I can share with you from my perspective the thing when I started feeling like an adult. I think my military career, my military experience is when I really began to feel like an adult. I entered the military at 21 years of age and exited it at 25. One of the things that I know that really had an impact on my life was the way that I began to take responsibility and really begin to formulate who I was through pressure that was applied to me through my time in the military. And I was able to make a lot of critical decisions in a timely fashion, and that helped me understand and feel and trust myself as an adult. But if somebody were to come to me when I was 18 and said, hey, David, you're not an adult, I would have 100% pushed back on that. I would have said, you're out of your mind. I'm living on my own for the first time. I'm working on my own. I'm paying my bills. I'm getting to school on time. I'm getting to my work on time. And all of those things to me at that time felt like that was, to me, that's what somebody says, I still don't feel like one. I love that. It's an ongoing process. I appreciate that as well. And I think those things are accurate. But I say that because I think those are good responses, in that feeling like an adult oftentimes just is a continual process. But the problem is that when we're talking about our children, when is it that they become an adult? And if we look at what the government says, they say, hey, at the age of 18, you're an adult. You're no longer a child at 18 years of age. But our society also says at 21 years of age, now you can drink legally. So maybe that's the time in which we become an adult. And you'll be able to tell me for sure there's a lot of growth between 18 and 21. There's a lot of development that takes place. As a 21-year-old, looking back at your 18-year-old self, you could probably admit, man, I was not fully aware of what was going on. And the reason we can say that is because we now know that the brain wasn't fully developed. So some people say, well, wait a minute. Well, maybe that's when you become an adult. Well, guess what? It used to be that we would say, oh, 21, 22, 23 years old is when that brain gets fully developed. But now there are studies, we're going back and saying, wait a minute. I think for some people, it's not formulated until they're fully around 28, 29, and 30 years of age even. And for some of you might say, wait a minute, my spouse still doesn't have an adult brain. and that's the reality of it. So when is that development taking place? Maybe you're not a real adult until you get a real job, right? And for some of you, it might just be if you just get a job, right? Maybe it's just whenever you get a job, please get a job, right? Is it moving out? Is it getting married? Is it having kids? And I think what we're talking about here and what we're explaining and what I'm trying to get to is that the transition from childhood to adulthood is anything but well defined. If we look back in history and we see the 50s and 60s, besides the 50s and 60s where things were a little more concrete, I think it's a myth to believe that becoming an adult is prescribed in seamless transition. So you're like, well, David, well, wait a minute. I thought you were just telling me that you're going to talk about when we parent, how do we parent a young adult? And so I think it's helpful to understand that it's not that clear to identify when a child becomes an adult, but it is our responsibility to begin having these conversations. And so I appreciate those young parents that are on board and saying, hey, I want to look down the road, right? I want to aim down and see what's really going to happen in the future. And so having these conversations with your children will help inform them to know when this is. And a matter of fact, there was a psychologist by the name of Dr. Jeffrey Jensen Arnett. And in 1995, he decided that after an interview that he had with 300 young people from ages 18 to 29 in cities all around the nation, for 5 years, he gathered data asking them questions about what they wanted out of life. And from these interviews, he felt like a new period of lifespan development was presented, that Erik Erikson messed up. And he said, hey, we need to put in this emerging adulthood, because what I've found in my research is this is an age of identity exploration. Young people are trying to figure out who they are, what they want out of school, what they want out of work, what do they want out of love, out of relationships. But this is an age of instability, right? They're moving probably for the first time and maybe multiple times. Maybe they're moving out of mom and dad's and going to college. Maybe they're moving in with a good friend, or they're trying to figure out relationships, and they're finding in a cohabitation is going to be something that they want to do. And so they're trying to figure all of this out. And what we know is that those frequent moves, they typically don't end until families are considered and careers are established in this age of the 30s. This time is also a time of self-focus. I remember working with several young adults in college as a therapist at the university, at Appalachian State University, and they would come in, and the process would often be like, David, I'm working on trying to get rid of some of the things that I felt like my parents were cramming down my throat. You know, they really served me up these beliefs that I'm not sure I believe in. And so I want to throw these things up and maybe figure out what it is I want to chew on a little bit more. Maybe I want to try these other things, because this self-focus is exactly the part of adulthood, this independence. That's the thing that is the hallmark sign of adulthood, is this new independence, this freedom to do what I want to do, to look to the past, to understand that, to be free from all these societal forces that are pushing me and demanding me to go to school and maybe get a job at this time, or maybe try and have relationships and settle down. I want to free myself from all that and kind of figure out myself. And so that's what's happening. And these feelings can oftentimes create this space that they feel stuck in between this leaving home and this trying to get to where I want to go, want to get to where my parents have been telling me is a good place. But the good news is that it's a time of optimism. It's a time of possibilities. And it's an opportunity for them to begin to emerge as adults and believe that they have an opportunity to build something maybe even better than what their parents have given them. And so you've got all of this going on, and you can understand that, man, this is really a sticky situation. There was another educator, Dr. McGoldrick, who was a longtime family scientist, and she suggests that we should view healthy maturation as requiring a single, we should not see it as requiring a single sequential pathway through marriage and child rearing, but giving hope to parents and saying, however, families are powerful shapers of reality. We get to influence, as parents, we get to influence who, when, how, and whether young adults marry and how they carry out all those succeeding stages of the family life cycle. And so with all of that being said, I want there to be encouragement in that we are still impacting our children. However, we might not be doing it in the ways that you wish you could, like we did in earlier stages, because of this emerging individuation and this need for being themselves. So the first thing that we need to begin to do, again, I told you, it's a lot less like parenting and more like building healthy relationships, is that we're just going to respect the differences that our children bring to the table. We're going to recognize and respect those differences to get to know them as adults. We got to learn how they communicate. You know what? Maybe they don't want mom or dad calling them every day. My friends don't call me every day. I have some really good friends that maybe I call them and it's not a good time. And so they say, hey, can I call you back? Yeah. I've got some parents that say, they won't answer my phone calls. I call them every day, 2 and 3 times a day. And I'm thinking to myself, I wouldn't want to answer your phone calls either. That's too much, right? So this understanding that we need to learn how they like to communicate so that we can be in good relationship with them. So while there are many things that we don't like about their behavior or choices, there's no better time to accept and celebrate the uniqueness of your child. Take this time to confirm who they are, and trying to avoid this idea of conflict. Perhaps the first time, this may be the first time that they're on their own, that they're making their own decisions, that they're solving their own problems, using their own methods, right? Maybe not methods that you desire or the way that you would solve that problem, but they're doing it. So affirm them, right? Find joy in connecting with them instead of conflict. My tell you a personal story. My brother's 47 years old. He is a tobacco user. And the fact that he uses tobacco drives my father bonkers. He oftentimes, almost every time he talks to my brother or comes in, my brother comes to his house, my parents' house, he gives him a hard time. Oh, you're still smoking those stupid things. That's dumb. This is kind of how my father addresses that. While I think the true heart of what my father is saying is that I love you and I don't want this tobacco, this unhealthy part of you to ruin who you are. I love you and I want you to live a long and healthy life. However, his word choice is more about disgust of what is keeping him from being healthy, right? What's keeping him from health. And so I want to encourage you parents that oftentimes that's the way we address our kids. We see the things that they're doing that we wouldn't do for ourselves because we fear the choices they're making might not be healthy for them. Instead, what we need to be doing is encouraging the fact that they're doing it. Hey, life's hard. I see you making choices. I see you trying to figure things out. I just want you to know that every time you need some help or you have a question, I'm happy to help you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the way you're doing things. I know you're having a hard time, but guess what? I believe in you and that you're going to be amazing and that you're going to continue to make the right choices. The next thing I want to talk about is no unsolicited advice. So making sure that when we share wisdom that's unsolicited, that feels a lot like scolding or parenting. And as I said, one of those main characteristics of adulthood is independence and ability to make your own decisions. So allowing them to do things their own way, as hard as that is, and listen, you've been doing it a long time, and for you early parents, becomes very difficult. I remember letting go of that bicycle as I'm running down the street with my, at that time, I don't even know, 4 or 5 year old, and watching that thing wobble away from me and watching them fall. It was very difficult for me to let go. That an opportunity time for me to just finally give up control and let them do their own thing and just cheer them on. It's scary. And so now it's the same thing. You practice the skill when you're learning how to ride a bike. And sometimes the best education is doing it the wrong time the first time, right? The more you give unwanted advice, the less likely they want to spend time with you. Just like my brother. The fact that what he's hearing from them oftentimes might feel like unsolicited advice. However, if you've got a good relationship with your child, they will ask for your advice. It reminds me of a story that Zig Ziglar told about some experience he had. And for those of you that don't know who that is, he is a well-known motivational speaker. He was a salesman for most of his life. And he tells a story about getting a shirt for Christmas. He was given a shirt, a very nice, high-end shirt from a very nice boutique. And he realized when he'd gotten into the package that the shirt was the wrong size. And so while he felt flattered that it was a smaller size, he needed to exchange this to get the size that fit. And so he goes to the boutique, and as he approaches the counter, there's a young lady there who steps to him and kind of with pursed lips and a furrowed brow, she asks how she could help him. What is it that she could do to help? And he explains the situation as he places the shirt on the counter, and he says, I received this as a gift. And she cuts him off right there, and she says, well, where's the receipt, sir? And he said, well, I'm sorry, I got this as a gift. I don't have a receipt. She said, where's the proof that you buy it? How do we know that you even purchased it from this store? And he says, well, I got it from a gift, and the actual brand, the name of the store is actually right here on the tag. And she says, well, it looks like it's been worn. And he said, well, I haven't worn it. It's actually too small for me. I couldn't fit in it. And I would like to exchange it for another size. I'm not looking for my money back. She said, well, we can't return a shirt that's been worn, sir. This has obviously been unfolded because it's not the way that we prepared it. And he tries to explain. He said, when I ripped into the package, I grabbed the back of the sleeves and they fell limp. And so I didn't know. I did the best I could by sticking it back in there. She said, sir, I'm sorry, without a receipt, with the fact that it looks worn, I'm unable to do the exchange. Extremely disappointed, Zig Ziglar walks out, and he not only does he feel frustrated, but he feels a bit belittled. And he remarks to himself, he said, there's one thing I learned in this story, or in this store, and that is that I'll never purchase anything from them again. Then he quickly tells a story of when he had a weed eater or a weed trimmer, and he's taking it back to another store. And he says he goes in with this, and this is after that other experience. And he says, I felt a little bit, I approached the counter with a bit of trepidation because he didn't quite know that the experience was going to be any different. And he approaches the counter and he sets the weed trimmer on the counter, and immediately he's seen by a young lady who's got a big smile on her face. And she says, oh my goodness, how are you doing today, sir? How can I help you? And he says, I have a weed trimmer here that it doesn't seem to be functioning properly. And she said, well, isn't that an inconvenience? We're sorry about that inconvenience. Let me see what I can do. Would you like me to replace that, or do you want me to refund your money? And he said, no, a replacement would be fine. And she said, well, if you would wait patiently, I'll do my best to get you a new one as soon as possible. And he says, within minutes, a new one appears on the counter, and she is elated. And she says, you know what, sir, I apologize for the few minutes that you had to wait. We're sorry that this was a trouble that you even had to bring it back. We hope that this one here causes no problems. And he says, that's fine. What else do I need to do? She said, oh, there's nothing, sir. You're well taken care of. We hope that you'll come again. He grabs his weed trimmer and he's smiling the whole way to the car because he said, that was the best experience I've ever had in my life. I can't believe that they were so happy for me to return something that was broken to them. And he said to himself, he said, whatever they sell, if they sell anything else I need, I'm going to come to this store first because of the way they treated me when I had a problem. Some of you might be wondering, what in the world is this guy doing telling me about a story with customer service? Because that's the way we approach our kids. That when our children can come to us and we can handle their decisions by saying, hey, show me proof. Are you sure there's nothing you did it? If you, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right to me. Tell me that story again. What was your role in that? If we approach situations and complaints that way, there's a chance our kids aren't going to come back to us. But if we say, hey, man, that seems like a really tough situation. I'm glad you brought that to me. I wonder if there's a way we could work this out together. Maybe we can talk this through. This would be a way that that child might say, hey, no matter if I mess up or not, I know I can go talk to mom. I know I can go talk to dad because they always receive me. Establishing boundaries would be the other piece that I would say is a critical component when we're dealing with young adults. Right now, whether you know it or not, we are living in a historical time. Pew Research released a study conducted in September of 2020 during COVID, and they said that for the first time in history, 52% of young adults resided with either one or both of their parents. Before 2022, the highest measured value was in 1940 census that was during the end of the Great Depression, that had 48% of young adults lived with their parents. I want you to know, if your children are living with you, one, you're not alone, you're in the majority. And two, there are some things that need to happen in order for this relationship to be well. It's hard when a child is living under your roof to not see them as your child. It's hard for a young adult to be living with their parents and feel like a young adult. So it's difficult on both ends of that spectrum. And so if you are living with each other, and even if you're not, these rules still apply. There needs to be some establishment of boundaries, and those need to be firm and set in place right off the get-go. At the beginning, we need to be able to say, hey, this is what we expect of you. These are the rules in this home. This is what if you're going to live here, these are the chores, these are the list of responsibilities that you will have. It's important to set a time frame and to say, hey, I think you should be able to do this in this amount of time. Or maybe it's more of a conversation and saying, hey, when do you think you'll be up and on your own? And that's a back and forth kind of conversation that we need to begin to talk about. What is the financial plan for you, right? I have rent there with a question mark. This could be tricky. It's very hard. And there's Dr. Welsh said that in economic downturns can also prolong adults' inability to achieve financial independence. And so this creates a difficult situation for both parents and children, who will have difficulty establishing appropriate boundaries, since it's almost impossible to be emotionally independent when one is still financially dependent as a student or unemployed. And so understanding this financial component is really a big component to that feeling of independence. Both of you are kind of struggling, both the parent and the young adult are both struggling with this need for independence. And so this financial constraint can be difficult. And so being able to place that time frame on it and say, hey, how long is it going to take you to get on your feet? The reason we might not charge rent is because by taking rent from them, it might prolong the fact that they're going to get to that final financial number that they have to say, hey, this is my launching point. This is when I have enough, right? But not having that piece might also make them feel pretty comfortable. I know that if I was living rent-free, that's a pretty sweet deal, right? I mean, most of you would probably feel that way. So what are we going to do? Well, hey, listen, we are going to still have to include some utilities here. You might need to help out with grocery shopping and paying for some of the groceries that you're eating. Or, hey, you need to make meals. We're not going to make your meals all the time. We're not going to do your laundry, right? Whether all of these things fit with you, these are boundaries that the two of you, or three, however many children you have in the equation, and however many parents are in the equation, these are conversations that need to be set up prior to that whole moving back in kind of deal, or staying at home when we're launching. We need to make that clear. And so that there never should a parent be cleaning up the mess of a child. When I go to a friend's house and I eat dinner, I don't expect them to clear my plate. I'll get up and help clear up. And I know that you all do the same. Those are the types of things we've moved from this parental piece into this relational piece. If these children have a family on their own, we're not going to make them choose between you and their family. This can be a critical component. So whether you have, you're used to those Sunday brunches or coffee in the morning, or maybe every year Christmas is at your house, the reality is that you need to allow them the space to create their own family traditions, and that maybe now you're the one that's going to travel to the adult parent and do that for the holidays. Maybe it's your turn to allow them to say, hey, when would be a good time to get together? Don't make your children feel like they have to choose. They need that time to make their own family traditions. So that kind of wraps up the things that I have in a short period. That's not everything, but those are the points that I hope that will help you to understand that this parenting a young adult is more of friending a young adult and trying to put away some of those parenting roles that you're used to, and being able to accept this young person, this young adult, as someone who's independent and making choices and doing life on their own, and really want to press in this idea that affirming is the way to go, and it will behoove your relationship into the future. If you like the things that I'm sharing, if you say, hey, gosh, where do I find more information about this? David, I need to know more information. I saw one of you that's got a young child that's on here. Hey, if you are curious about what's going on in extension, reach out to your local extension office. There's one in every county. No matter where you are and where you're tuning in from, there's an extension office there. We will get all evidence-based information out. We have a Parenting Express guideline, which will teach you everything from how to breastfeed or not breastfeed, to selecting diapers, to whether or not my child should sleep on their belly or on their back, to car seats and how to pick out a car seat. All of that, eating hard foods and moving from bottles to whatever. We've got it all in this newsletter, and we would love to give that to you for the first 2 years of life. We've got it covered for every month. We also have active parenting classes. I don't know however many of you rode in the back of a pickup truck when you were a kid. I hope every one of you did. But the reality is one of the things that we know about that right now is that that's not safe. And so the practices that we used, that our parents used when they were raising us, we've learned a lot. Just like riding in the back of a pickup, we learned that it's not safe, so we're changing it. We're not trying to tell you your parents were wrong, because they weren't. They were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. But the good news is a lot of that information's changed. So if you're in that parenting role now and you're finding it difficult, we would love to help you out by giving you more information on how to do that and do that well. We also have parenting a second time around. If you're a kinship, if you're a grandparent parenting a grandchild, if you're a kinship parent that's stepped in because the parents are no longer in the picture, we would love to support you as well. And we've got all kinds of curriculums and classes going. We would love for you to come and reach out to us if you have those questions. I really appreciate each and every one of you attending. I hope that you got something that was valuable out of today. If you have questions, I want to open that up to everyone at this time.
Thank you so much, David. You guys are welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question. You don't have to type it in the chat. You can type it in the chat if you want to, but if you just want to ask it, you can do that as well. Just unmute and go for it. I don't see any questions in the chat so far, and I don't so far no one has asked any questions. So I guess you guys are welcome also to reach out to David if you think of something in the future and you're like, oh gosh, I meant to ask about this, or maybe something comes up for you as you are parenting or relationship building with your young adult. And you may run into a situation or scenario and you're thinking, how should I approach this? Or is there a resource to help me with this? Then you can probably reach out at that time as well.
I'm seeing some come through right now. So will this recording be sent out? That's one of the questions, Azeta.
Yes, always.
And then Jamie has asked how I've got a tween and he and his dad do not agree well. Yeah. Or do not argue well. I feel stuck between them. How do we manage that? You know, I really appreciate that question. That is a tough situation to be in. So I can appreciate where you feel stuck. And a lot of times this is difficult, not only in your home, but in most homes. And that is because a lot of the ways that arguments are handled feel like a back and forth. And one of the things that I try and work with couples who are in an argument stage, and I say couples because a lot of times it doesn't matter what that dyad really is, if that's a marital dyad, if that's a sibling dyad, a parental, it doesn't really, a parent, a child. The reality is that the best thing we want to do is we want to seek the request in the complaint, and that time it's often difficult. So one of the scenarios I'll give to you is my father and sister were arguing over my brother's tobacco use, and my father was getting really upset about that. And one of the things, and my sister was just retaliating and getting upset at him. And I said, one of the things that happens in that cycle is that when somebody throws a jab, we want to jab them back, right? We want to come back with something and tell them why they're wrong. But I want to say that the difference between that, and I'll use a jujitsu example. In jujitsu, it's a grappling, kind of a wrestling martial art. And one of the ways that they can tell between a black belt, which is a more senior kind of Jedi, and then the white belt, which is like a green, very new to the issue, is that when in that confrontation, when the black belt mounts, meaning gets on top of the white belt, the first thing that white belt wants to do is push them off. But what that does is that it allows the Jedi to grab the arm and puts them in an arm bar or arm lock and can easily break their arm and win the fight. The reality is what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to cover, hide your elbows and roll on your hip, try to roll over. The reality is what we don't want to do is engage in that fight. And that's the reality. We don't want to engage, because when we engage, they'll get you. What we want to do is deflect. What we want to do is kind of wipe off. And so in some ways, I would say, Jamie, that argument doesn't include you. It might not be something that you want to get into. Say, no, it's not between me. I'm not about this. I'm not in this argument. The other thing would be to share that, what we want to do is deflect and really try and allow that person to understand. Because once we do that, if my wife is upset with me and she comes to me with a lot of heavy concern and maybe is upset with something that's happening in the household, sometimes it's easy for me just to go right back to her and say, could you say that again? Could you say that again? That was really good, what you said right there. and she'll stop and be like, what do you, I don't even know what I said right there. And that's kind of it, right? I just want to do the Jedi move. I don't want to swing and say, well, the reason you do that is because of this thing. So I recognize this is a long-winded response, but there's nothing really short and quick about that. It is more of a practice each and every day to try and feel like, no, this isn't my argument. So Jamie, I hope that helps you. I saw somebody, okay. This individual, Karen, says that she's leaving with something I saw just today. Jenny recently wrote about a new Elizabeth Strout novel, Lucy by the Sea. I haven't seen that. She said, what makes this one special, at least for me, is the way Strout captures what it feels like to be the mother of grown children. Breaking news: just because your kids are out of the house does not mean that you don't worry about them. Mixed in with the anxiety, though, is all the joy and beauty too. I have never seen anything as beautiful as those girls. Oh man, I feel this. So I'm glad that was it. I don't really want to put that. Okay, sorry. Thanks so much. Your stories really spoke to content. Okay, I think that's it, Azada.